We'll go ahead and we'll call Joint Appropriations Committee back to order. The next item on our agenda today is fire prevention, and electrical safety. So, Mr. Reed, welcome.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for allowing us to be here with you today. If I could, Mr. Chairman, I would start off with a few introductions of the other members of the department who have joined me here today. To my right is Deputy Director Mark Young. To my left, Justine Morris, and as I jokingly have said a number of other times, our entire finance department. And then behind us over here to the right is the Chief Electrical Inspector, Jane Allred. And I'm glad they're here because they keep me out of trouble.
So Allred have one or two wells.
And Mr. Chairman, with our limited time together, if it's appropriate, I would start off by mentioning that I have been watching the meetings online, and I'm aware that many of the directors have spoken about the governor's compensation package. And if I could, I would just paraphrase Director Parfit, who was up just prior to lunch, and he did a very nice job of explaining the situation and explaining our experience over the last few years. But with this addition, that even as recently as this morning, we had a job offer that we had been working on, and we received a phone call from the candidate on that position, and they had been attempting to find housing in the state of Wyoming that they could afford with the salary that we were offering. And he had to decline the position because they were unable to find appropriate housing. And we had offered them the opportunity to seek housing anywhere from Lander, Riverton, Cheyenne. It was a fairly flexible position for them, and so they were not able to accept the position because of that. I also learned on Friday that some of our staff is utilizing Uber and DoorDash as a form of additional income for their families, and that just became evident on Friday. And so it is a concern, but again, I thought Director Parfit did an excellent job of summing that up. So,
Director, and thank you for that. And was just looking at the vacancy sheet. Were you trying to fill the inspection specialist or the instructor?
The instructor position.
Instructor position.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I would move on to page 4 on the budget presentation that we have, and just give a brief summary of the agency overview. And then stand for any questions moving into the budget at that time. The Department of Fire Prevention Electrical Safety, with a biennial budget of approximately $7.2 million and 33 personnel, it will be 32 on the next revision, serves the state of Wyoming and its citizens, fulfilling many safety and statutory requirements. Department of Fire Prevention Electrical Safety was created by an act of the 33rd Legislature back in 1955. It consisted of several offices located in Cheyenne around the state, and the clients served include fire service, electricians, law enforcement, architects, engineers, building and fire code officials, federal, state, county, and municipal agencies. We also work with building and electrical contractors, the electrical industry, media, business owners, and general public. We're divided into 4 separate divisions. Those include the training division, electrical division, prevention division, and the administrative division. Recently, our challenges have been the recognition of an increased risk of cancer and cardiopulmonary problems in firefighters. This was documented a few years ago, and as a result, we have created new decontamination procedures and training procedures across the state with the newest recommendations to reverse this trend. Luckily, and it's something that I'm very proud of, the state of Wyoming with statute 2715-101 recognized a presumption for certain diseases affecting firefighters. And we were among the first states to adopt such a law. Many states have followed suit since that time. Our greatest challenge recently has been the results of the recent COVID pandemic and the loss of funding associated with the restrictions placed on our fossil fuel and our fossil fuel industry. Combination of staffing constraints, loss of budget, staffing reductions has a greater impact on smaller agencies like this than it does on larger agencies, because the loss of a single position can impact multiple areas in our small agency. And a good example of that is the position we were just speaking about, which is the trainer position at the academy. Our trainers also function as fire investigators. And so the fire investigators actually are responsible to respond to fire investigations across the state of Wyoming, especially any fire-related fatalities. The DFVS has been operating with the same fee schedule since 2005. Our current fees do not reflect the national average costs or fees charged in other states. A proposal for a fee change is available and would move Wyoming into parity with surrounding states and allow for a longer term use of our special revenue fund to offset the loss of funding from state reductions. This does not address the continuing recruitment and retention associated concerns associated with the inability to reward employees for continuing job well done. Our successes. As indicated above, we have successfully eliminated office space around the state, with the exception of those locations involved directly with architectural plan review and electrical plan review. Other locations housing only inspection staff have been phased out, resulting in a budget reduction not directly reflected in our budget, but in other budgets across the state. Co-occurring costs associated with the phones, internet, et cetera, have also been reduced. These reductions are directly related to the use of mobile offices and Wi-Fi, which allows the use of our online programs in the field. Reduced cost, but greater access to information and quicker turnaround on reports has resulted from these efficiencies. The Wyoming Department works with over 8,000 electricians, contractors, and others requiring state electrical licensing. Now, this has been accomplished over the years through a paper application and phone calls. Now, recently, what we've done is we've moved from old programs, which cost the state of Wyoming hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars, into a new program called Image Trend. And I've spoken about this before. This Image Trend program in the department has now gotten us to where we have online electrical licensing. And not only did we develop it into online electrical licensing, we now do our permitting process. We do a plan review process and others, which actually was just a lifesaver through this last pandemic issue. If we hadn't been online with our licensing, we would have had a great deal of difficulty staying up with everything.
Director, while you pause there, I've got a couple of questions going back to some of your agency challenges.
Yes, sir.
In your narrative, you talk about that the department's been operating with the same fee structure or same fee schedule since 2005. And you're also talking about that you've been on that special revenue has been offset part of the cost associated with that, but requires action prior to the 25-26 biennium. Is that action you're talking about? Is that changing the fee schedule? Is that what you in there? Is that what you mean when you're talking about action that has to happen before 25-26?
Mr. Chairman, co-chair, members of the council, what we have researched is that we have a sufficient funding stream with the income and the outlay to continue our budgeting process at a reduction. Every year, we're going to fall behind a little bit. And so what we need to do is increase our fee schedule so that we can offset that loss of funding. Now, the fee schedule that we've put forward, and we put that forward at a December meeting in 2020. And we're working on it again, and we'll approach the legislature within the next year or so on it. But this fee schedule that we're looking at hasn't changed since the year 2005. That fee change that we're looking for will simply bring us into parity or even close to parity with the region here. We are so far behind. I think the number I remember is that we're approximate, that we could look for a 125% increase in some of our fees and still be below the regional average. And so,
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
Sorry, how many of those are statutory changes or you can do by internal rule?
most of those are restricted. What they do is they give us parameters that we can operate within. So we can charge up to a dollar amount, and that's statutorily driven. And so almost all of the fees we're talking about would require a statutory change.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, if you want to give us those, we'll have those bills drafted and ready to go by February.
Mr. Chairman, we would appreciate that. And we have that almost completely finished. So I'd be glad to do that, and I appreciate that.
You bet. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On those fees, I remember this very well from our discussions last year. And how many of those fees are at the maximum currently? Because as you said, we give you a range, and statutorily you have a range of those. Then how many are already at the maximum? And of those that are not at the maximum, have you increased any of those in the past year to try and get this fund closer to not depleting in 2025, 26?
Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, the fees that we have outlined now, our current fees, the electrical contractor fee is at its maximum, I believe. So if to give you a percentage, it would be, I think they're all, aren't they? I believe that we are charging the maximum on all those fees that are statutorily controlled, sir.
Thank you. As you talk about fees, I mean, sure, not all fees are created equal. Does the 80-20 rule apply to fees? Do 20% of your fees, or is there certain fees that end up being generate the majority of the fees that are collected? It's okay. You can phone a friend, or you can just have her answer. It's okay too.
I could, but Mr. Chairman, our plan review fees are 100% into the general fund. And so those are completely into the general fund. All of our other fees, the licensing and the other permitting fees, are a 60-40 split into 40%. It's 40% hours, and then 60% hours and 40% into the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Continue. Go ahead.
Agency successes. I'm trying to pick up where I was here. Here we go. On page 6, I mentioned that the implementation of an online fire and life safety plan review portal recently completed in 2018 gives us the electronic process for handling PDF style building plan files. And it's a program that we refer to as Bluebeam. This process has helped with costs. It's helped our speed of approvals. And although we're allowed a 21-day turnaround time by rule, since the upgrade on the blueprint, this online blueprint process, we have less than a 5-day average turnaround on plan reviews. And it is especially helpful when we have, as you can remember, the days of the big rolls of the plans and back and forth with the mail. If there was an issue, then that extended our handling time. The implementation of mobile devices and mobile inspection software, allowing our agency to close fire inspector offices across the state when developing relationships with adjoining state fire marshals, has helped us better utilize the available equipment regionally, such as driving simulators, fire sprinkler demonstration trailers, et cetera. And then with limited budgets, it is difficult to provide all the needed training, but with these new relationships, we're able to access and offer high quality training without the associated costs. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would move on into our budget.
Okay,
With the exception of the exception requests, this budget is the same as our 21-22 submission. I would point out Governor Gordon has recommended the approval of our submitted budget. The exception requests that we made, looking at page 9, you'll find that the top one is the HR consolidation, the human resource consolidation. That was a total of $187,672 in our agency. That one, that exception request, of course, was approved. The second exception request was one we titled it as travel for $81,805. The reason we placed that exception request was because when we had the personnel reduction, it added an additional burden to the inspectors that were out on the road. And it wasn't the mileage, but what occurred was we had additional nights away from family. And so the hotels, the M&IE, and those things were increased. And we were looking to just recoup some of that loss to avoid some of the burden on the special revenue fund. We did that in both, as you'll see, both the electrical division and the fire division. And Governor Gordon has opted to not approve the exception requests.
go ahead, Representative Simpson.
Director Reed, did the governor give you a reason, an explanation of why he thought that additional travel expense wasn't justified?
Mr.
Go
Chairman,
ahead.
Representative Simpson, I have not spoken with the governor. I would make an assumption that some of the logic behind it was that we're going to be moving forward with the fee increase, and that fee increase would handle the need for this exception request. I would defer to Kevin if.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Kevin, you want to elaborate?
The director's correct. If you go to page 24, and your co-chairman also advised that he would assist the agency in modifying their fees. If you go to page 24, you'll see, for example, their special revenue history. We're good through 23, 24, 25, 26, but in 27, 28, we're no longer able to fund it at the current way. So we would need to have a fee increase, either the fee increase that's in the control of the agency or statute to be changed before we start adding more money to this budget center.
Okay, thank you.
Mr.
Continue, Director.
Continuing.
Yep.
Moving to page 12, it is simply the exception request that was approved for the HR consolidation. In our case, the HR consolidation has gone smoothly with the exception of the fact that our HR person was also the administrative assistant for the agency. And so we've been moving duties around to accommodate for that.
Okay,
On page 13, again, it is the same as it was in the 21-22 budget, with the exception of the
HR transfer.
HR reduction. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Then page 15, moving forward, you'll see the exception request for that division. And again, the budget is the same as the 21-22. The exception was for $27,814, and the governor recommended not approving that.
Okay.
Then moving to page 18. It is the finalized version of the Fire Prevention Division. Again, the only change from 21-22 was the $27,814 exception request.
All right, thank you.
Page 19, we move into the Electrical Safety Division. And you'll see there the $53,991 exception request. And again, same as before. Then page 21 is just the breakdown on the exception request and the denial. Page 24 that Director Hibbard just referred to is the revenue side of the house. And you can see there with the estimates on our continuing balance on the special revenue fund. And that by statute is limited to the electrical safety division and is not used in the fire prevention division.
So looking at on page 23, so if we look on the revenue generated, electrical contractor licensing generates for the projected for 22-23 is a little over 534,000. And then the permit fees generate about 250,000. So just quick adding, that's about 784,000 out of the $1,050,000 is generated just by those two categories of fees. Is that how it works?
Yes, sir.
And so that's, that's roughly 76, 77% of the total fees come from just those two fees, right?
That is
all right. Thank you. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you. Mike, on your, just a question on, you and I have talked a little bit on some electrical things this fall. I'm just curious, when on your master electrician test, did you start doing the practical portion of that test? And why?
Go ahead.
Chairman. With that, I would defer to the chief electrical inspector, who is brilliant at this.
I see what you did there. Electricity, brilliant. I get that. I get that. Thank you. So, Ms.
I assure you that was not intentional.
This is all right. Go ahead. You got to press it till it turns green.
Oh, there.
There you go.
Okay, there you go. So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, several years ago, the state stopped giving the test here in Cheyenne, and we contracted with International Code Council to do the exam so that it could be nationwide. And then it's proctored by Pearson VUE, which is also nationwide. So someone in another state can actually take the Wyoming master's exam, not in the state of Wyoming. They don't have to come here to take it. At that point, they did away with the practical part of the examination because it was too hard for the people at Pearson VUE to administer that portion of it. It's supposed to be taught in the apprentice schools. We require 576 hours of apprentice education, either Department of Labor approved or equivalent. So we have an equivalency module that we go through to determine what's equivalent. And we look at the curriculums that are taught at the schools, and they're supposed to be teaching this practical side of it, such as bending conduit, wiring a three-way switch. Those are the practical things. So that when they do 144 hours each year, and each year covers a different thing. By the time they finish the 576 hours, they should be proficient in that.
And hence, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
And I guess in my mind, that is why we then do the test, is to determine if they did learn that in their practicum, right?
Well, the test covers everything in the National Electric Code. And so in the National Electric Code, it will ask you to, on paper, give evidence of how to make a bend or how to wire a switch. So they learn they can pass the exam using the National Electric Code, and they should have that knowledge and have gained it. Then we also require 8,000 hours on the job training. Right. And so they are trained on the job to do those things. as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Guru.
Question. I don't know who is in charge of enforcing all this, but just from anecdotally from your travels and your folks' travels, do you see a big problem with people coming in from out of state that don't have these licenses in state? And how much of a problem is it? And should we be thinking about that?
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
ahead.
Senator. We enforce it. Our department enforces it. We have an enforcement. Dave Harley is our enforcement officer, and when we hear about people who are coming in without licenses, or we find people without license on a job, he goes to that job site and meets with them. And our ultimate goal is compliance. A lot of them just aren't familiar with Wyoming's laws. And as soon as you tell them what they need to do, then they will comply and get those licenses. We have had some issues with the PV systems, mostly. People who sell those and bring in their crews from out of state. We get a lot from Utah, a lot from Idaho. And there again, once we explain to them what our rules are, they generally comply. So we don't have a huge issue, but we just don't have enough people. I really rely a lot on other contractors to be our eyes and ears in the field. When they see something or they suspect something, they let us know, and then we'll send our enforcement officer out there to talk to them. Big organizations such as the Family Dollar, for instance, did a lighting change out, and they brought in a whole crew from out of state. None of them were licensed. Well, as soon as we contacted Family Dollar, their headquarters, and explained what the rules were, then they got licensed. So compliance is our main issue as far as enforcement. And it's worked really well for us, but there is a problem with out-of-state licenses.
Follow up, go ahead.
Yeah, just knowing how much, how close we are to borders on how much development goes around, around the state, especially up in my neck of the woods. I hear about a lot from contractors in Teton County that seem to, feel that a lot of out-of-state folks are coming in. And so, so you're the office, you're the contact point.
Yep.
And you rely on them to.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Lloyd. Excuse me. Representative
I've
Larson.
had a chance, Mr. Chairman, I've had a chance to digest what you said a little bit. When you says we decided to move to this, from this test to this test, who is we?
The department, the division, the electrical board. The electrical board, they control what the requirements are and who does the testing. So the electrical board made that decision at that time that there were too many licenses for us to administer the test in Cheyenne anymore. And so I can't even remember, it's many, many years ago, back in 1998, I think, that they moved to having ICC. And they have a test bank. Now, the questions in the test bank, there's several states that use this test bank, and we get together every 3 years when they update the National Electric Code, and we go through the test bank of questions, and we add questions, we remove questions that are no longer relevant to the new codes, make sure they all meet the new codes. So there's actually 4 or 5 states that use this test as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, continue.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just piggyback on the enforcement issue, and thank you, Senator, for the question. 5, almost 6 years ago, whenever I had the opportunity to come to the department, we were still doing the paper applications. We were still doing the paper permits. We were still, and interestingly, we had almost no ability to track who was licensed, who wasn't licensed, what level of licensing or training they had. Now we actually have the ability of all electricians carrying their license on an app on their phone, and they love that. The people that are complying with the rules love the way we're doing things. It also gives us the ability to immediately know if a project is being handled by an appropriately licensed electrician. So the progress that has been made over the last 5 and closer to 3 years has been a marked improvement over what we did do. We do still have, as the chief inspector said, a long way to go when it comes to the number of personnel that it takes, because even licensed electricians, we have 8,000 electricians that we're dealing with. And so when you take that into consideration, and then you take into consideration the ones coming across borders and not complying, and there is a real problem with the intent of not complying. And so, but we have started doing some enforcement and have actually taken some to court with a fine structure. So it's we're getting much we're getting on top of that, but it's a big hill to climb.
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you. Do you all work with YDOT and the ports of entry? As far as maybe just for informational purposes for people coming over? Because I know that too is a concern that I get a lot of calls about, where people are coming over and not paying sales tax and not doing that, but most of them are, and they're stopping at the point of entry if they have trucks and stuff. But I mean, I was thinking like if you had signage or some type of information system so people know when they're coming in to do a job, that they know that they have to be licensed and how to get it.
And Mr. Chairman, Senator Drew, no, we have not been working with them. It's a good idea. I think it might offer us a limited aspect because of the electrical contractors aren't required to stop at the ports of entry. And so we'd have to work something out there, but thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Continue.
All right, sir. Moving on to page 28 and 29. These are the training division for the Fire Prevention Electrical Safety Department. The training division's primary responsibility is to ensure public safety by providing emergency responders with safe, innovative, quality training, education, and other opportunities. The division also maintains individual fire service training records, and we do the certifications through an online training portal. We also coordinate the Wyoming Firefighter Certification Program, which is handled by our certification committee, which is made up of chiefs and other appointees from across the state. We do a collection and evaluation of fire incident statistics, and we conduct fire and arson investigations. And a point of interest on the fire investigations is again that the trainers pull double duty or dual duty. They are trainers and they are also arson investigators. They're required to be certified by the state of Wyoming, and also most of us are certified from the National Fire Academy at Emmitsburg. And so they receive a high level of training. It was interesting how we did have trouble getting the fire departments to get the calls into us. We had some difficulty with dispatching. And recently we went to a one-call system where now the fire departments across the state have one phone number they can call, and they always get the on-call arson investigator. And that has resulted in an increase in the number of cases that we're handling. Our annual average of fire or arson related calls was 34 calls per year. This year, we're going to top over 50. And so we're seeing this increase, and we think it's partially because of the accessibility to our investigators, and we've eliminated that confusion. And as we've said before, the training academy breakdown is the same as it was in 21-22's budget. And with that, I think I can stand for questions on
Mr.
any of the
Chairman?
budgetary.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you,
Representative
Mr.
Kinner.
Chairman. Director, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back a couple of pages. I've been trying to look at the math here, and maybe you can help me.
Yes,
On page 24, down under expenditures, I'm seeing the expenditures for 19 and 20 of 782,000, 21-22 of 958,000, and then 23 and 24 of 1,567,000. And I'm trying to understand the huge increase there. And maybe you went over that while I was playing with trying to understand it. So if so, I apologize. Maybe you could help me with that, please.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Co-chair. Representative Kenner, what that reflects is the increase or the movement of some of our salary costs from the general fund over into the special revenue fund. And so that's directly reflective of those salary costs.
Okay, so it's, excuse me, a follow-up, please.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you.
Representative
So it is movement from those two funds. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Kenner. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So I'm just curious, I mean, since you have an ex-fire chief sitting next to you, I mean, was he ever the problem about not calling the fire investigators? when you needed to do that?
Mr. Chairman,
So now so you see some of that, he's the face now. He gets them all in line now.
He's a year younger than I am, Mr. Chairman, so I would hesitate to ever criticize anything that Chief Young did.
Good to see. Chief Young used to be the fire chief in my town. So it's good to see you, Chief. Any other questions for our friends at the Fire Prevention Electrical Safety? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate your time and your presentation today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And Chief Young is also one of the last recipients in Fireman A. He was one of the last active guys in Fireman A. So.
That means he's triple dipping.
Is that right? I didn't know that. Congratulations to your family. Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. See you later. What's that? Because the first one's. All right, our next department for consideration is District Attorney in Trona County. So, Mr. Easton, we're glad to have you here today. Welcome, and we're happy to go through what we've been doing with folks is obviously we're looking at standard budgets. The standard budgets are relatively flat, as kind of we've seen, but we're spending most of our time on the budget, the exception requests that you're making. We're also interested to hear anything you'd like to tell us about your department as you deal with some of the challenges and other issues that you're facing in your office up there. So with that, we'll go ahead, welcome, and we'll turn the presentation over to you and introduce your team or everyone to proceed, and we'll pay attention.
I've been the district attorney in my first term here. I'll stand for retention in November. However, I've been with the office itself 21 years now. I started as a misdemeanor attorney straight out of law school back in 2000 and kind of worked my way up to where I am today. What that has given me is the opportunity, one, to grow within that office, and two, to kind of see the changes that the community and the office has undergone in those 21 years. I can tell you today, I think our violent crime is clearly on the rise in Natrona County. A number of years ago, we would probably average 1 homicide a year. And Ms. Lozano behind me at the Public Defender's Office would probably echo that for Natrona County. Now we're closing in on 3 to 4 homicides a year. Obviously, they're not huge numbers that you see in Chicago or LA or those things, but there are citizens in our home. The majority of those homicides are domestic in nature. Not necessarily in a dating relationship, but perhaps parents, those type of things. Our aggravated assaults continue to go up. And perhaps the most striking thing that I have seen, at least from Natrona County, is the rise in drugs. And simply not talking about marijuana use. We recently had a traffic stop out on 220, the road that goes by Altova. And 73 pounds of methamphetamine was seized. Now, I know down on I-80, you folks have a lot of those seizures. On a back road in the middle of Natrona County, that's shocking. In fact, I spoke with my predecessor, Mr. Blonigan, and asked in his 35 years, have you ever seen a bigger drug bust? And the answer was no. We see the rise in black tar heroin as well as cocaine. Those drugs and prosecuting those drugs, both at the misdemeanor and the felony level, compromise roughly about 1/3 of the office's time and caseload. And I'm not even mentioning or talking about marijuana and those issues as well. Our other areas of large caseloads obviously are DUIs. I know last time I was here, I was lucky enough to talk with you, Senator, about DUI and the blowing at the intoximeter at the jail twice a day. Our DUI numbers are steady, if not rising. We rarely see anyone close to the 08 limit. I believe we average probably a 1.6. Our 4th time DUIs or our felony DUIs are higher than a 1.6. Just ballparking, I would say a 2.0 on average. They're not close. I can tell you I have one case now and it's representative of the felony DUIs. And not only is he over a 2, but he's driving the wrong way down the interstate. You will see those routinely, whereas 20 years ago when I started, that was a headliner, something that you got a phone call about. Unfortunately, that's not true anymore. The good things the office does is we have a student court program for kids that are in danger of not graduating high school and have run-ins with the law. It's almost like a very intense drug court program. It helps them get their high school diploma, helps them get the counseling and the services they need. The benefit for them is if they successfully complete the program, we as the office move to expunge their record. So they get to start life essentially free of that criminal conviction. That graduation rate has continued to grow every year that we've put time in that program. And that's exciting seeing young people who normally may not have had that opportunity, get an opportunity to not only graduate from high school, but do so with a clean slate. We do participate in a drug court program as well. Our drug court program has been very successful. It's an adult drug court program and helping people that have addiction overcome that addiction and breaking those binds. We were fortunate enough, Judge Christensen used to be a prosecutor within the office, started that program, and then ultimately applied for and was selected to replace Judge Huber. So he's taken that over and has done a remarkable job in kind of seeing both sides of those issues. Something that I think Natrona County can be very proud of, in fact, both of those programs. Those are kind of the long and the short of the office itself. There is one vacant attorney position, and it's been vacant since about January, I believe, of last year. It seemed to be a buyer's market, so to speak, and not so much a seller's market. If you look at the Wyoming State Bar website, the last I looked, there were near 30 attorney openings. We pay our starting attorneys $59,000. We have the ability to maybe go to 60, somewhere in that neighborhood. You recruit an attorney at that price. Frankly, it's someone that needs experience. And we've had, I believe, 7 applicants for that position. I kind of had changed it around to see, initially, the hope was to get an experienced attorney. And we call it a felony level attorney. I had 11 applicants for that. However, the majority of those folks were new out of law school. One clerk for a judge in Alaska, timing issues and that nature simply didn't make it work. I asked that the position be reclassified to a misdemeanor position, and that's when I received the 7 applicants. One applicant, an experienced attorney from New York. We really talked, and the break point, as I'd heard the fire marshal's presentation, was cost of housing in Wyoming for him. He's now a special assistant to the Eastern District of Oklahoma because housing was cheaper in Oklahoma than what it is in Casper. Even if we could meet salary wise, he just couldn't move his family. So we continue to struggle with that and downfalls. I'm fortunate in that the city attorney's office has helped pick up some cases that my office can't handle because of lack of manpower. As many of you know, the city attorney's office is 1 prosecutor. They have the city attorney and I believe 2 civil attorneys. But we try to make that work. We try to make that work with the other municipal jurisdictions in Natrona County, simply because I'm down that attorney position as well as an legal assistant position.
And Mr. Co-Chair, how much did you offer for the senior position?
We had offered $75,000.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. So those are the struggles, or the realistic struggles that we have moving forward. Being a prosecutor isn't quite like being in private practice, nor is vice versa. You put in a lot of time and you have a whole lot of different interface of agencies you got to meld together. You work with the police department, you work with the sheriff's department. Oftentimes those ideals don't necessarily come together. You have to spend some time on building those relationships to ultimately be successful in the courtroom. With the first exception, the victim witness coordinator position, we handle roughly 3,600 cases a year through our office. Between the district attorney's office in Natrona County and the district attorney's office here in Laramie County, that accounts for about roughly 2/3 of the criminal caseload. To say we're busy, I think is somewhat of an understatement. You learn how to kind of triage and deal with things and move it effectively through that. One way we do that is relying upon victim witness and victim witness coordinators. We have one for the misdemeanors, we have one for felonies, and then we also have one that handles adult sexual assault and domestic violence cases. The person that handles the adult sexual assault and domestic violence cases currently, as we came down this morning, has 200 open files. That's a substantial number of files. It may not necessarily seem like that much, but that person is fully dedicated to the victim bill of rights set out by statute to notify victims of every hearing, notify victims of potential plea agreements, those type of things. That accounts for roughly 6 hours of her day is just answering calls, keeping up on those cases, let alone preparing for trial. Since COVID struck our office, there is a backlog. We've been able to work through that backlog to some degree. However, that victim witness coordinator has gone to 14 jury trials in the last year, both on the felony level and on the misdemeanor side of things. That's an extraordinary number considering felony trials last at least a week in Natrona County, perhaps longer in setting those up. That position has been funded by a VOCA grant that we've had for the last 18 years. The VOCA grant has since been cut dramatically, and with the budget cuts that the office itself went through, we're attempting to balance that and really failing at it. It was the budget department's recommendation that this position be made part of the standard budget. I can tell you without a person to handle domestic violence and adult sexual assault cases, our office will not be able to function given the Bill of Rights statute and keeping folks up to speed. We continue to work on that, but nonetheless, given the volume and the time commitment, that position is absolutely critical to the office. Our second exception is a legal assistant position. As I had stated, our office handles roughly 3,600 cases. Some of those on one end are, I wouldn't say trivial, but speeding cases or dog at large cases. They don't necessarily take a lot of time. But on the other end of the spectrum, we also handle murder cases, which take an extreme amount of time. We handle that with 6 legal assistants. We used to have 7. You simply do the math, it's over 500 cases that one legal assistant handles. Given the caseloads and the nature of things, I did a somewhat of an informal study in my office on misdemeanors. I believe Representative Stith had once heard a question of how long does it take legal assistants to do things and how does it relate to public defenders or private attorneys. And I still think the answer that you received, sir, was accurate in that because we have the burden of proof, everything in discovery-wise comes through our office. So it's a little bit hard to project that out onto public defenders or private attorneys. Right now, it roughly takes to open a file and ultimately close that file within our system. And assuming the individual pleads guilty, it'll take that legal assistant roughly an hour and a half to an hour and 15 minutes. Simply to input the charges, do the subpoenas, and go from there. The rule of thumb, and that was on DUIs and domestic violence cases. Specifically, we were looking at DUIs that didn't have a lot of body cam or dash cam footage. We're finding while it's a plethora of evidence, frankly, at some points it's overwhelming. If, for example, you have a DUI crash and there's 4 officers, you potentially have 4 dash cams, 4 body cams. And if somebody has a digital recorder in their pocket, you have that. It would be nice if everything was standardized so you knew each time that's what you had. But inevitably, one officer said, well, I didn't turn on my body cam or my dash cam was shut off. So you're balancing, trying to figure out what you have and when you have it. And that falls up on the legal assistance. Those take a great deal of time. I informally also did a study on time in court and how long does an attorney really prepare for that. And there's several attorneys, and maybe I'm a little off, but I found for every hour in court, you're preparing somewhere between 2 and 4 hours outside of court to get ready. So when you have a lengthy criminal case, you're putting in, you know, a lot of time. And a lot of that falls up on your legal assistants as well, because you have those videos that you have to edit and do things for court presentation. You simply can't hit play and say, well, here's where he was talking about his prior offenses and those things. So it's extremely tailored. To do it with 6 legal assistants in an office of 3,600 cases is taxing, to say the least. And it's a very high burnout area. I think we attempt to accomplish that the best we can and move forward. Frankly, I think we could use more than 7 legal assistants at a given time. But I do think we can make it work with 7 legal assistants. The next exception is Justware or e-prosecutor. Justware is a internal tracking software that the district attorney's office uses. I believe Laramie County also uses Justware.
Yeah, we did talk about this with her on Friday. So and she
Yes.
told us you guys were using the same software.
And they've sunsetted down what we call Justware now to start something called e-justice, e-prosecutor. The downside with that is obviously the price went up. I was not thrilled by that idea. In fact, I was not going to use Justware. I wanted to use other data software, and I'd reached out to Judicial Dialogue. I know a lot of attorneys or district or county attorneys, excuse me, use Judicial Dialogue. For us, Judicial Dialogue was more expensive. It would have cost us $13,500 to move the data that we currently have over to Judicial Dialogue. That was a price I simply couldn't accept. Then they talked about maintenance agreements per user at $400 a year. It didn't take long for me to understand, while I may not like e-prosecutor, it was obviously a cheaper way to go, I thought. What we end up getting with e-prosecutor or Justware is it's almost very much like a subscription business, in that $25,000 a year buys you 10 licenses. I have an office of 20 that need to use the program. When we talk 3,600 cases, what experience has taught me is you have to be efficient within that office. And asking secretaries to look up things that attorneys can look up or vice versa is not efficient at all. We used to be able, when it was Justware, to cover our licenses by that agreement. I believe back then it was $29,000. And that would cover it. That doesn't do that anymore. That'll give you the 10 licenses. And then anything above that is the additional $2,000 per license.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Stiff.
Thank you. Mr. Isson, I'll ask you the same question I asked your counterpart from Laramie County on these extra licenses, and it's this. You've got 20 people, or you will have 20 people in your office. I would take it that not all 20 of them are going to be accessing e-prosecutor at the same time on any given day. That'd be pretty rare. So my question is, can you have it so you've got your 10 licenses that sit on your server and only 10 stations can use it at a time? But couldn't the entire office make do with 10? And I do say that by analogy to my own office, where I've got some software that I've only got one license for, have it on my server, a couple of us in the office, it'll only work on one machine at a time. But instead of paying for 2 licenses, I make do with one. because it's unusual for both of us to need that software at the same time. So could you make do with just 10 licenses and save the $90,000?
Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff. That was the idea that I had going forward. The downside that I see is I suspect your assistants will always be on e-prosecutor, or at least the vast majority of that time. The attorneys, I agree with you, they'll be on and off to some degree. But then trying to figure out, okay, who didn't lock out of their computer, who's doing things, becomes frankly a rabbit chase, if you will, sir. It's not that a prosecutor necessarily lives on e-prosecutor, but there are certain things that you need to know and necessarily need to know right now. I think the better course of action to an attempt to make kind of all this work is, the 20 licenses I think is important. I'm not sure how efficient we're going to be with 10 licenses. That gives me great concern. Is you and I have talked over the years. I was a prosecutor who would go to the court and ask the court to save paper clips, to try to save a buck, so to speak. I'm willing to try things, but I'm also willing to say when things kind of need to be that way, sir. Our last exception is one of Westlaw. And speaking of that, Westlaw, and I'm sure other attorneys have spoke about that, it's simply a research database. Our research database that we've used for a number of years, the Wyoming State Bar attempted to come out with a research database called CaseMaker. I believe they've updated it a little bit since then. Our experience with CaseMaker was that it was cumbersome, hard to use, and extremely ineffective. As a result, we never really started to use CaseMaker. We always used Westlaw. Westlaw seems to be to some degree, I don't want to say the only game in town, but fairly close. They've raised their price as well, and they've increased that, not a great deal, but $66.19 a month for a total for the biennium of almost $1,600. That's the increase that we're seeking there for the biennium. Those are normal things that we would have tried to absorb within our budget. Frankly, at some point you get to the point where you can't absorb too much more, and that's where we're at, unfortunately. I do believe we've always been financially or fiscally responsible in those things, and that's why you see limited numbers of requests coming out of the DA's office in Natrona County, unless it is, vitally important to the office. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it, man. Questions for Mr. Itzen? Questions for Mr. Itzen? I think we ask them as we go along, so thank you. Thanks
Yes, sir.
for coming down today.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Related to my grade. Takes a while, really. What is that? 10? 10? All right. Next we've got is our Office of Public Defender. So State Public Defender. And how are you, Diane? Good to see you.
I'm good. How are you, Mr. Chairman?
Fine.
We're going to have a contest to see if you can take as long as the last two presenters did.
Oh, I can talk, so we'll see.
Yeah. So go ahead. The time is yours. We're welcome. We're glad to have you here. And I think you were here when I was explaining kind of what, just, tell us whatever we need to know about your challenges and your priorities and that, and then basically move on into your budget. And in particular, we're obviously mostly talking about your exception requests because these budgets are pretty flat. So.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, senators, representatives. Thank you for having me today. Again, my name's Diane Lozano. I'm the director of the Public Defender's Office. I've held that role since 2007, but I've been with the Public Defender's Office since I graduated from law school in 1994. So I'm going into my 28th year doing this type of work. I think I've been in front of most of you in some capacity or another. So probably the struggles that I'm about to share with you that the Public Defender's Office has isn't news to you. So I will try to be brief. As this body knows, our budget requests are based almost solely on our caseloads. We track newly assigned cases per fiscal year, and then we punch those numbers into a caseload maximum percentage. And our goal is to keep all of our attorneys, each of our field offices, and our agency as a whole below 100% of caseload maximum. And we do that because we believe that that's the best measure of what the Constitution requires. I will tell this body that caseloads have gone down, I think, dramatically in the last 2 years. Since fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 21, our caseloads have dropped 2,078. Our caseloads are about 70% misdemeanors, close to 30% felonies, and maybe 2% or so juvenile cases. So the explanation for that, I don't have. I think there's a couple of things that we can think about what caused those caseload drops. I think the way prosecutors and law enforcement treated cases during the pandemic might have an impact on our cases. I think the new or fairly new indigency standards have made an impact. Whether or not judges are truly paying attention to those indigency standards in every case, I don't know. But I will tell you that my attorneys are paying attention to that. My attorneys received training just this last October from me about how we can do a better job with that as well. We have the poverty, federal poverty guidelines. We're punching in numbers and we're going to courts and saying, hey, we think this person makes enough money to hire a private attorney. And so at least from our end, we're doing a better job in that regard. So even though caseloads have dropped, I would agree with District Attorney Itzen that violent crime has not. I think it's gone up. Our in-house database isn't great for tracking types of cases, but I think I could run some reports with ETS's help to get that to you. But I'll tell you, in Laramie County, where of course I live and I'm handling a caseload now, during the pandemic from March 2020 until now, we handled about 7 homicide cases. And yeah, that's not Chicago, but that's Cheyenne, Wyoming. And that's more than any caseload I've ever worked on. In fact, I had to help with 3 or 4 of those because of some of the vacancy issues that we have here in Laramie County. So in addition to crime changing a little bit, we have to remember that the Public Defender's Office, we don't have to coordinate with agencies the way District Attorney Itzen just shared with you, but we represent human beings. And we represent human beings who come to us not just with their criminal conduct, but with their sometimes severe addictions and a lot of mental health struggles. I think right now, one of the biggest struggles my attorneys would tell you that they have is the mentally ill clients that they have that we can't get services for, or that are languishing in county jails waiting to go to the state hospital. I have 2 clients right now who are charged with aggravated assaults involving the use of knives, 2 separate cases. Both of those individuals have been found not competent to proceed to trial. which the law says they have to be. And the next step then is that they have to be shipped to the state hospital to see if they can be restored to competence. And that just means, can we get them to have the mental capacity or ability to cooperate rationally with their defense? And I've been told that my two clients who are struggling in the jail, who are fighting with the guards, aren't eating, throwing bodily fluids around their cells, that it may be 7 to 8 months before they can get to the state hospital. And that 7 to 8 months that they aren't being seen in court, and they're certainly not having conversations with me because they are mentally incapable of doing so. So the struggles that we have in our agency are ones that we can't really track. I can tell you anecdotally what those are in terms of the types of clients that we have. But I would say, and I know you've heard a lot about this in this session, recruitment and retention continues to be a struggle in the public defender's office. Our 21-22 budget request, I think we asked for 23 exceptions requests, and all of those were designed to help us figure out how to better recruit attorneys. And then once we get attorneys, keep them working for us. For those of you that are familiar and might remember the contempt case that I had to go through up in Campbell County that was resolved by the Wyoming Supreme Court was really about recruitment and retention. So for example, in that office, I had 7 full-time attorneys slated to work for us, appropriated by this body and approved by the legislature. And those are the number of attorneys that we needed to handle those cases based on our caseload maximums, based on what the Constitution requires. And then we had 4 of those attorneys quit, all who went to the county attorney's office. And what happened was I had 3 attorneys who had to then take up the caseload of 7 attorneys. We said we were unavailable. We went through the whole process. We ended up paying private attorneys to do those cases. And that's what the Supreme Court said that we could do. But then what happens to those 3 attorneys who stayed? They stayed and they worked. And then we were able to fill the positions, or we added some contracts and we got our numbers back to where they needed to be in terms of attorney rates. And then those 3 people had it and they were burned out and they quit. And that is kind of the issue that we have in the public defender's office all the time. This isn't easy work. Not a lot of people want to do the work. But when they do, what I need to be able to do is to be able to pay them for the work that they do. So certainly the governor's proposal to you, and that's a decision that you have to make, would help us with recruitment and retention. But in addition to that, the attorney classification scheme is something that A&I is going to review, because quite frankly, I don't know that it works for the public defender's office. And that's not something that I haven't shared with people before. I have 54 attorneys who work for us. The vast majority of those attorneys are doing what we call journeyman level work. They handle misdemeanors without supervision, most felonies without supervision. And that's the lion's share of criminal cases in the state of Wyoming. And so that would qualify as level 3 work. And that's paid probably pretty far under market. I think those attorneys probably make $72,000 a year, something like that. But the reality is that those attorneys who don't qualify to be a level 3 attorney, who don't have the minimum years of practice that the classification scheme requires, are level 1 or level 2 attorneys, getting paid far less than that, doing far more serious work. And so ultimately, the fix for the public defender's office has to be, I think, addressed a little bit with our exceptions, with the governor's compensation proposal, and then a look at that classification scheme. Because I certainly don't want to bring anybody in, an attorney who has probably some student debt and some loans to pay back and a family to support, to do what I think is very difficult work, and then say to them, I'm going to make you do really hard cases, but I can only pay you to do the easy ones. And we don't have a choice to do otherwise. So those are, I think, generally the struggles that the public defender's office has now. Are there any questions based on my longer than I intended opening?
I think you're on a roll, so it was.
Just keep going?
Just keep going.
Okay. So then I would like to turn to our exceptions requests. We just have 3 this year, and the first one is on page 15, entitled Court Ordered and Private Attorneys. And essentially, that's the exception that takes care of some of those caseload problems and vacancy issues if we can't fill attorneys. In the 21-22 budget, this body appropriated about $2.5 million for us to use with some flexibility to either hire up to 5 attorneys or legal assistants or contractors to help us with caseload overflows or crises in our offices like we had in Campbell County and Natrona County in the years prior to that. And then COVID hit and everything else. And so that amount essentially was reduced by $1,369,861. One thing that I didn't mention when the Wyoming Supreme Court found that how we handled our situation in Gillette was the constitutional way to handle it, is that if the public defender's office is unavailable to handle a case. So let's say I have the situation happen in Gillette, I don't have enough attorneys to handle cases, then I have to ask the courts to appoint private attorneys. And the Public Defenders Act, though, requires that the public defender compensate those private attorneys. And the going rate at that time, and probably I think into the future, is $100 an hour. So the Public Defender's Office has to not only struggle to find attorneys to replace the attorneys who quit, whether it's by a contract or an employee position, we then also in the meantime have to pay for those private attorneys. So this exception request was designed to at least help us address those issues if the time comes that we need that to happen again. With the caseload drops, I don't know. I'll tell you, in Laramie County right now, I should have 10 attorneys. I'm down 3 felony attorneys, and I have a lot of misdemeanor attorneys and not enough misdemeanors to keep them busy. But those misdemeanor attorneys are right out of law school, and I can't really give them a child sexual abuse case, at least not yet. So this exception request is designed to address that. We certainly would like to keep the flexibility that's in the 21-22 budget that allows us to take 900 series money and decide whether we can hire up to a certain amount of employee positions or if we'll use that to hire attorneys on a contract basis. The governor's recommendation is to deny that amount of money in the 900 series, but to allow our agency to be able to move money from the 100 series to the 900 series when we have attorneys leave us and we have that money, if you will, available in the 100 series, and use that to either pay for private attorneys or contract attorneys in the 900 series. And I certainly believe that the Public Defender's Office can live with the governor's recommendation.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
So can you tell us how much carryover you have from 19-20 funds and the 21-22 funds that you're requesting? Just to know what those amounts are.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I think on page 14 might be a beginning of the answer to that. And I can get to you what our reversions are going to look like and what our carryover is. But as you know, our agency is funded 85% general fund and then 15% from the county. So I think what's on page 14 is the carryover with the revenue. So I may have to get back to you on the reversions.
Yeah, we just don't know how much of that is your carryover.
Okay, we'll figure that out and we'll get that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Stiff.
Director Lozano, thank you. Couple of different questions. I'm certainly sympathetic to the compensation issue to keep public defenders retained in your office because it's hard work, and appreciate what you and they do. 2 questions. One, if you're down 2,000 cases, do you need this money in the exception request? That's kind of the basic question. Do you really need it if you're down? The second question is a broader question. What if the legislature were to clarify the law? And by the way, congratulations on your victory in the Supreme Court in April of 2020. That had to be a stressful situation, so congratulations. What if the legislature were to amend the statute to say that the public defender shall defend anyone who meets the indigenous standards and not give you an out? That is, just say you must represent anyone who requests a public defender who's eligible to do so. How much heartburn would that cause you? Because what I found, because the statutes, it was interesting the choice the Supreme Court made, but the statute's worded kind of strange because the statute says the public defender shall defend any needy person. And then in the next section of the statute, it says, if a public defender is available, they'll be appointed. So it's just an odd, the statute right now isn't written very well. And it seems like the legislature ought to rewrite it one direction or the other. So my question is, how much heartburn would it cause you if we said you must every time represent an indigent person?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, and thank you for the congratulations. It was stressful. And I would agree with you that the statute, the way it's read or written right now allowed for that. And so I'm going to answer that question first if I can. I think it would cause me less heartburn if our office was funded to handle every case that we were told we had to handle. What we learned from that case is that public defenders are still attorneys who have the same ethical obligations to each of their clients. And, so for instance, let's say I represented 200 people last year. I have to be able to provide competent and diligent counsel to them. And if my caseloads are too high, I won't be able to do that. We also have conflict of interest cases. District Attorney Itzen talked about the big drug bust that happened in Natrona County. Well, within my offices, I can really only handle one of those co-defendants, and then I got to have contractors do it. So in terms of if there's not funding that matches the mandatory shall, I think we would have a lot of heartburn, and certainly I would have heartburn, but I think the system would have some issues as well. The criminal justice system, I've always viewed it as, well, a lot of things, but in terms of this explanation, as a round table with 3 legs. And the judiciary has one leg, and the prosecutors have one, and the public defenders have the other. And if they're not equal, that table isn't flat. And I think if that table is not flat, then justice isn't served, and not just to criminal defendants, which is my job, but to victims and to communities who have safety issues. In terms of the first part of your question, or the first question, if caseloads are down, do we need that money? It's hard for me to say now. I don't know where caseloads will pan out. I can't see into the future, but I think the governor took that into consideration by making the recommendation that he did. So if we are losing attorneys and we have that money in the 100 series and we can't cover the cases, then maybe we can move that money down. But I can tell you, I'm not going to move debt money down just to do that. I'd like to keep it in the 100 series. I'd like to be able to keep that series funded in the way that it is. And since the pandemic, we've made some changes. We've had some offices that in Cody, my caseloads are really down in Cody. So we moved an attorney to Worland because that office seems to struggle and needed the help. In the budget, in the supplemental budget, we cut an attorney and a legal assistant in Newcastle as well. And we're doing okay. We're covering it with contracts. So I think the governor took into consideration that if caseloads stay down, we might not need an extra push. So fund us where we are, and then just give us the flexibility and the options that it requires to cover the cases. And I can assure you that we're not going to abuse that.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
So just to follow up on that, Diane, because I was looking at your 600, 900 and what you're paying outside counsel. My experience is that you get bigger bang for the buck with a full-time employee than you do going to outside counsel. So anytime you can do it, you're number one, you're getting probably better representation because they do it more often and they've got more experience. So my question is, does it make more sense to increase the pay scales of your counsel and to try to minimize or reduce the number of outside counsel you have to go to? And everyone's having a staffing issue right now. That's across all boards. But and it's amazing to me that you're missing 3 here in Laramie County, and then you can't fill them. And if you're paying more, you could probably fill them. So.
And Mr. Chairman, I agree. I've always felt that I would rather have somebody working for me full-time. Contract attorneys help us out a lot with conflict cases, but they have more than one master, if you will. And if our caseloads are manageable, I can't imagine that, except for a few exceptions around the state, that there are better criminal defense attorneys than the attorneys who work for us. Being able to offer a salary that competes with market, I think makes a big difference. For the 3 felony attorneys that we've had open, I think at least since May, most people who apply to work for us aren't licensed in the state of Wyoming, or they're still in law school. And then occasionally somebody's just passed the bar. And, I could hand them some DUIs and some misdemeanor thefts and shoplifting, but, I need somebody who can handle strangulations and help me with homicide cases so that I can not spend all my time doing that. So I agree with you.
Go ahead. I'll ask my questions later. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Director. So as these first two exception requests are the ones that you put forth as part of your budget reductions last year, right?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson, yes.
And so in essence, what you're doing is you're trying to get them put back in place, though we were anticipating them being
That-
ongoing. Is that fair?
Yes, sir. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. That's exactly right. And that's just based on uncertainty and not knowing where we're going to be.
Thank you.
So my questions are kind of following up on Representative Stith and my co-chairman's questions. As we've talked to the judicial branch now. So we've talked to the courts. We've talked to the Attorney General's office. We've talked to both of the DAs. We've talked to the county prosecutors, and now we've talked to the public defenders. And all of you have the same problem is, and it's not just attorneys. I mean, we go across the state, we're finding that we're not attracting the number and quality of candidates that anybody wants in just about any position statewide. And so, it's something we're going to wrestle with for a while because it's, salaries are cause, but obviously there's been a substantial shift in the last 3 years as how people view work and their work environments and all those things. So it's going to take a while to shake that out, but it's of cold comfort and small consolation that all the other branches, all the other legs of your stool are having the same complaints.
The table's
So
getting
maybe-
shorter.
So, if the legs are just getting shorter, the level is still a level playing field, but it doesn't make it easier. But going back, just talking, about this flex power to move back and forth. And my concern is, at the end, I think this amplifies on that. My concern is that is really a short-term solution. And that the more that we flex out of 100 to 900 to pay attorneys who aren't full-time and aren't career defenders, public defenders, eventually that's going to put us at a place that none of us want to be. So I'm wondering in looking about that, if you have any other suggestions. I mean, so we understand the government's flex that's a short-term fix, but overall, I think some of it's going to be pay, some of it's going to be other work conditions, some of it's going to be flexibility in the office. There's all kinds of elements that are coming into this workplace and supply chain issue that we're seeing nationwide and statewide. So I'm just wondering, as you've thought about that, if you've had any other thoughts about that flex. My concern is the flex might need to be able to go both ways, quite frankly, which puts a tremendous amount of trust in you. And the best advice we'd be able to give to you is not screw it up if we do that. But that's my concern is if the flex only works one way, ultimately we're going to destroy your office as far as professional defenders. So be interested if you have any thoughts on that.
Mr. Chairman, I do have some thoughts. I can tell you that with our 21-22 budget ask, and then the way that appropriations, and I think Representative Nicholas and Budget Director Hibbard designed that $2.5 million to be, I think in a way that was part of the answer. It gave us some flexibility, but not to the extent that we're talking about right now. Really what I think the state of Wyoming needs, maybe a long-term, maybe it's pie in the sky. But I think you need a strong public defender's office. And then I think you need a panel of attorneys that are practicing out in the communities, not necessarily beholden to the public defender's office, who can help take some of those cases. Not much different than the panel that the federal courts have or alternative counsel, the way Colorado has. And so we envisioned with that money and the flexibility that this body gave us last budget year, starting that process. The district court judges, that's their idea. When the contempt case happened and that wasn't really affecting them because it was a circuit court thing, they're all like, well, let's just get panels in every community of attorneys to do this work. And without a lot of reality-based suggestions, but really, I don't think you can say the public defender's office is the only one doing public defense work in the state of Wyoming, just like they can't do that in any other community. So that's the one idea that I have. And in terms of, putting tremendous trust in the state public defender to do that, that is a scary proposition. And it's one that we'd be, like I said, really careful about. We have a lot of discussions, but You know, other than adding another body of attorneys to do the work in some capacity, I think the pay increases, whether it's to the amount that's been recommended, I think that makes a difference. You know, but my first salary offered to me by Leonard Munker was $22,500 a year. And I thought I was rich. So times have changed. Times have changed.
So when I got out of law school, I was making 17.5.
So I remember just out of law school and the phone ringing and Judge Brimmer going to my boss and saying, it's your firm's turn to be the public to defend this case. And,
Yeah.
and here's your independent. So they, Drew, you're the new attorney. You go over and you get to defend this case. And so, you know, my criminal experience was, you know, the only C I got in law school was criminal procedure. The second year with Professor Galloway. So anyway. So, I mean, there's a lot of, I think the reasons are many.
Mhm.
Salary's definitely one of them.
Mhm.
There's some other things we're just gonna have to figure out how to grapple with statewide on employment issues, attorneys and everyone else.
Yeah.
as well.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll tell you that two of the attorneys that we had leave Cheyenne were attorneys that one of them had worked for us, gone to prosecution, and then came back to us and sort of envisioned herself as a long-term public defender. And then another younger attorney who wanted to be with us forever. The furloughs made a big deal, made a big impact on them. And now we don't have those. So, but that certainly affected morale. I'd like to be able to tell my attorneys that they could work remotely. But we're back to in-person courts and only a handful of courts are electronic. So we still have to be in person. I think some of it's generational, you know, and sometimes salary isn't the answer. So I wish that I had it, but it's a scary thing to know that, you know, there could be a homicide or two tonight in Laramie County, knock on wood. And I might not have an attorney who can handle those, and I'll have to cobble together some misdemeanor attorneys and the state public defender to see what we can do.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll go over to Senator Kinski since he's in person now, and then we'll come back to you, Representative Schwartz.
Mr. Chairman, partly are non-lawyers
wait,
allowed
go
to
ahead.
ask
No, wait, wait.
questions?
Senator Kinski gets to go first here.
I'd like to
Don't
learn
we
a little
hold you
bit
in
more
contempt?
about the panel, because how does that differ from what we do right now, which is in Sheridan, for instance, you have that informally. I mean, when you've got conflicts or you're too busy, that you know who the lawyers are in Sheridan that you can reach out to on a contract basis to fill in. Sometimes they're available, sometimes they're not. How would this differ from what you're doing now? The panel concept.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Kinski, I think it depends on the community. I think Sheridan is a good example of how we have figured out how to keep people working for us on a full-time basis. And then we have some contractors. The greater issue and how we make it work is when we don't have attorneys in the community that want to come work for us or won't even handle conflict cases or won't do a contract. In Laramie County, I can't find an attorney who will handle a contract in Laramie County.
Bob's got time.
I think it's the caseload, and I think it's because we have 7 judges that they have to work around. And in Campbell County, when we lost those 4 attorneys in Campbell County, our first reaction wasn't to tell the courts, stop, we can't take any more cases. Our first reaction was to reach out to people to see who would do a contract. Barney and Graham are helping us out now, but that's the only firm in that area that would help us. We were being told that attorneys in Campbell County could charge $5,000 for a first-time DUI, and that's, you know, you probably don't know, that's a lot of money for a first-time DUI. Here in Cheyenne, I think it's $1,500. So it just kind of depends on the community, but if in each community, we could make it worth people's while to occasionally take a case and not have a regular caseload. So, and part of the answer to your question, I guess, is in Sheridan, our contract attorneys are on a regular rotation. They are handling a half of a caseload, not just a case here and there. And so I think the here and there might be attractive to some attorneys so that they're not spending, you know, 75, 80% of their cases trying to track down public defender cases and go to court.
Okay, thank you. Representative Schwartz.
Begging the permission of the chairman. Thank you. So when I look at this, the 900 series to the 100 series, it's a fixed, it's one amount of money essentially.
Mhm.
And what my concern is that ultimately, especially if case numbers start to rise again, that
moving money into the 900 series is almost a loss because the contract lawyers, as I understand it, make significantly more per case because they're on an hourly. Am I on track here?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Schwartz, a little bit, yes. So the contract attorneys that we have that handle the caseloads probably only make about $47 an hour. But yes, if we were to pay private attorneys the way we had to in Campbell County and Natrona County in 2019, that's $100 an hour. So they do make more. But in that situation, we're just paying them to handle a certain amount of cases until the office can recover and hire. So it's not long-term, and it would never be designed to be long-term. It would be just, can you help us do these cases until we can hire somebody into this position? But I can't predict how long that would take.
So it's not long-term if you can solve your hiring problem.
Right,
But otherwise it could be an ongoing.
right.
Any other questions?
Okay, so that was exception one. Exception two is our capital case funding. And as Representative Larson said, we did offer up our capital case funding during the budget cuts. At that time, we had no active capital cases. And I suppose a little bit of hope on my end that we wouldn't have to deal with those cases. But here we are. As long as the state of Wyoming has the death penalty as an option in first-degree murder cases, the public defender's office has to have the money to represent those individuals. The best example I can give you as to why that is, without telling you what the ABA guidelines are or what the United States Supreme Court or the Wyoming Supreme Court have requested, is the Dale Eaton case. His first set of defense attorneys spent $147,000 to represent him. The federal district court decided that they were wholly inadequate, that his Sixth Amendment rights were violated in an egregious way, and that case came back down. That case is being resolved and not going to trial. Had it gone to trial, the projected cost was $1.4 million. So I don't know what the percentage increase is from $147,000 to $1.4 million, but that's what it requires. The $500,000 is really just starter money for us if we have a capital case. So the first thing I have to do is I have to send my attorneys to training every 2 years. And if each attorney on the case, each capital case requires 2 qualified attorneys, a mitigation investigator and an investigator, those 2 attorneys have to have training. So every 2 years I have to have money to send them to training. So that $500,000 accomplishes that. But then the rest of that money at least gets me started on a case. There might be a case, capital case. Let's say somebody commits first-degree murder in a small community here in Wyoming, has lived here their whole life, doesn't have significant mental health issues, IQ is above 70. I might be able to do that case for $500,000. But without getting into the investigation, I don't know. But I can tell you that we had 2 potential capital cases in Park County. The minute a prosecutor says out loud, I'm thinking the death penalty, my ethical requirements and the Constitution requires me to put together that team that I just mentioned, and I have to start doing a life history investigation or a mitigation investigation. So one of those defendants, I decided to reach out to some mitigation specialists that I've worked with. We don't have any in the state of Wyoming. I have to hire out. I have to go find them out there. I asked them to look at the case, to do a little bit of work on the case up to $40,000, and then tell me what that case they think would cost. This defendant had IQ issues, had mental health issues. It was a felony murder child abuse case, so it was especially egregious. And their estimation was that with experts, investigation, a trial on whether or not his IQ was high enough to be executed, that case alone, that one defendant would cost $1.1 million. And that doesn't count the time and the hours spent by my attorneys on those cases, because they don't get paid extra to do those cases.
And that's the defense side. That's not the prosecution side.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. And the counties have to pay for their experts and the housing of the jurors and all that. So it's not just you're right, it's not just a public defender cost. So what that $500,000 allows me to do is to start spending on a case and then gauge how much I need. And then I'm going to have to go ask Governor Gordon or come back in supplemental for more to cover those cases.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Let's go to Representative Larson. We'll go to Representative Stiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Director. I'd like to kind of go back then to the discussion you had last year when you offered that up.
Mhm.
And I heard your explanation a little bit, but I would assume that you knew that there would be other capital cases in your future. And so when you took all of that out of your capital case, out of your 903, what were your plans for covering that moving forward? Is kind of the one question. I'm just trying to, I understand the need for in trying capital cases, but I'm trying to understand the mechanics behind the exercise we went through last year of having these reductions be ongoing, and how you, at that time, how you anticipated on covering that moving forward.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson, we made that recommendation with great trepidation, not knowing if we would have capital cases. We knew if we had a capital case, we probably had one of two options. We could go to the governor, who was telling us we were $1 billion in the hole, and say, go find us money. And I can't tell you how much, but let's start with $1 million or $500,000. And so we would have gone that route. We would have had to, or because of the way the Public Defender Act is written, I could have said to the courts, we can't handle this case ethically. Public Defender's Office is out, but then somebody has to pay for it. And again, that's the Public Defender's Office. So it may not have been the wisest offer up that we made, but it was $500,000 that had been untouched. And when we got to supplemental, it was something that wasn't obligated in any way. So it seemed like an easy offer.
Thank you.
But again, not the smartest probably.
Thank you, Representative
Mr.
Stiff.
Chairman, Director Lozano, to follow up on that, let's assume that during the next biennium, there are no capital cases that are filed, but this exception request is approved. How much of this would you spend for the training you mentioned? Or otherwise, how much of it would you actually spend?
Right. Mr. Chairman and Representative Stiff, the training, depending on how many attorneys want to go, I think the most we've spent in a biennium was 70,000. Does that sound about right? Okay, so maybe far less than that. Let's say $25,000 every 2 years.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, continue.
And then exception number 3, as Representative Larson will notice, we had offered up in the budget reductions in supplemental 21-22, the public defender training, believing that we could live without that money. I would tell this body that the State Bar did help us put on a free training. It was virtual, and I couldn't guarantee that my attorneys went there. The Public Defender's Office or the Public Defender Act requires that the state public defender ensure that her attorneys are in good standing. So that training money isn't a lot of money, but it certainly enables me to train my attorneys consistently with the same ideas and the same policies and philosophies. It helps with morale, believe it or not. We've talked a lot about how hard public defender work is, and unless you've done it for a long time, it's maybe hard to understand. But we'd like to be able to not just train our attorneys, but bring our legal assistants in so that I can train them in regard to what was required of us in the fiscal year 13 audit. So we would, and the governor did recommend that.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? All right, continue, or is that, I think that gets us through your exception.
That's our last one.
Any other questions for Diane on her department budget? Director, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Mr. Chairman,
Good
before
luck.
she leaves, one question towards the end on page 21. The governor, in the court-ordered capital case, the governor recommends carrying forward any unobligated, unexpended capital case funding.
Mm.
Do you know what that balance is as of today?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Walters. This, I believe, okay. That's the court ordered capital case. So that was the Eaton case, and that case should be resolved and there shouldn't be anything to carry over. I think right now our bills stand at about $660,000 that we've paid out, and we probably have to pay out another, I'm guessing about $70,000 for their final trip, so we can get that remaining figure to you. So it was the 1.2 minus about that 600,000. So my guess is about $600,000 is what will revert back, and we didn't ask for any more money in that regard.
follow up on that, Mr. Chairman?
Sure, go ahead, Representative.
So I'm trying to read on your budget tables on page 20 that you're showing 0.
Right.
You have the 1.2. Just trying to follow where you've paid out 660,000 and you'd show what you might be reverting other than your back of the envelope math. Not trying to
No, that's okay.
question it, just trying to further understand. Maybe you just need to follow up with that, with us on that.
And Mr. Chairman and Representative Walters, we will have to follow up with you on the exact amount. And we didn't think to do that for you today because we're not having to spend that money. So we didn't make it a priority, so we can get that figure to you. But my best educated guess is that $600,000 or more will come back from that amount. And it might even be more than that, depending on what the carryover was from prior budget. So we'll get that immediately to you.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, in this case, no, this is basically the tail end of the biennium, largely in all cases, that we don't have a provision to carry forward the dollars and those dollars revert. So in this case, we're cognizantly aware that there's going to be some money left over. And then we'd like to have the provision to carry that forward. And also for longevity, to keep things going in the future for the very same reason. It's important that we keep having this conversation about the fact that there are residual funds. We'd like to keep them in play, but we don't want to stack on top of them. For example, rather than putting a $1.4 million or $1.2 million request in, now we're talking about a $500,000 request. So all that comes together through time for us. Mr. Chairman, that's the difference between the base budget and then the standard budget. There is no standard budget. That's what those zeros are. So this particular budget center is navigated on a one-time basis for one-time requests with the understanding of keeping our eyes on how much is going to be available for reversions. So if we were positioned now to have something to the tune of $1.2 million in reversions, we probably would have denied the $500,000 request. Instead, just carry it forward.
And if I could add to that, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So the $500,000 request that we just talked about as exceptions to belongs to Division 1 of the Public Defender's Office. Those are just our public defender cases. But then on page 20, that was, I think, Unit 400, we had a separate budget division set up to pay for the Eaton case because we were ordered to do that. And that's the one that shows the zeros because that case is being resolved and we're not asking for any money on that. But it was part of our, what looked at like our standard budget, as Kevin just said, but we're not requesting any more money in that. So it's two separate capital case requests is what it looks like, although the Eaton case will be done.
So, and if I can just go back, if I understood what Kevin just said, what you've got is in Unit 401, which is the court order capital case, the Eaton Fund. There, you said there's about 600,000 unexpended there.
Right.
And so then if we put this other 500 for the capital case, if that's in, we've got basically a $1.1 million stuck in here for, that can be B11, or if you use not use your capital case, would be B11 back to help supplemental capital case. Is that what I understood what you said, Kevin?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it falls in line with the director's public defender's testimony that if we got ourselves into this in a biennial basis, we could expect about 1 million to 1.2 million in cost.
Got it. Just want to make sure I heard right. So thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay,
Any
thank
other
you.
questions? All right. Thank you very much.
you.
Appreciate your time today. We're gonna take a, Director, we're gonna take a 15-minute break here and then we'll jump into you, okay? Thanks for coming over early, appreciate it. So let's go ahead and let's break until about 3:05. All right, we'll bring the Joint Appropriations Committee back to order. And next on our agenda is the Department of Ag. So welcome, Director. Do you have any preliminary remarks and want to introduce your team or jump right into it? We're happy to listen to your presentation.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. Good afternoon. Thank you for having us today. We appreciate the opportunity. Again, Department of Agriculture. I'm Doug Miyamoto. I'm the Director of the Department of Agriculture, and with me today, I have Teresa Jarvis, who is the state chemist and runs our analytical services lab over in Laramie. Stacia Berry is our Deputy Director, and Julie Cook is our fiscal expert and our administration manager. So to give you a little bit of background of the Department of Agriculture, kind of where we've been and where we're going as it relates to budget. I think most of you that serve on this committee have heard me talk in the past about kind of the ethos that we use to prioritize out our programs, whether we're going through cuts or whether we're going through exception budget items, whatever it may be. We try to apply the same system so that there's some consistency in how we go about our budget. And so we have our programs prioritized in tiers, and that top tier of priority programs and expenditures within the Department of Agriculture have to do with all of those programs that support human health and safety directly. So if our program has an impact on people's health and well-being, those are our tier 1 programs, and that's where we put a lot of our focus. So an example of that is our state meat program. It's a high priority program for the department. We have to make sure that that program runs well and that we can track the meat that comes through our system that way. So that's an example of a tier 1 program. Our second tier of priorities is centered around the ability of business people in Wyoming to continue to participate in commerce. We want to make sure that we're supporting those efforts. And so an example of that would be our weights and measures program. Anything that's sold by volume or is sold by mass has to be done so on a certified scale or a pump. And so that's a kind of an example of the type of programs that fall in that tier 2 category for the Department of Ag. And then our tier 3 programs are important as well. And those are all of the remaining programs that are obligated by us statutorily to carry through. And so we have programs in the policy realm that we deal with, in federal land management policy, that type of work. Those are tier 3 programs for the Department of Ag. So with that, Mr. Chairman, with that brief introduction today for you, we have a total of 15 requests. And these are mostly one-time expenditures for equipment that need to be replaced within our programs. Some of these are in collaboration with ETS to maintain our schedule of replacement of hardware and software. And then we have some additional exception requests in collaboration with the budget office to do some cleanup and an effort to reduce the number of B11s that we're sending through the system. So if it's all right with you, Mr. Chairman, I can start by just working our way through our budget book by exception request.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could direct your attention to page 19. This is within our administration division. And this again is this is our priority number 6, and it's a request for $81,868. This is to maintain schedule with replacement of hardware and software within the department. So done with the blessing of the CIO.
Okay.
Okay. And then on page 20, the next page, we have another request for through ETS, and this is for telecommunications. And this is to increase the amount of virtual server storage and the fees that are being charged to the department to maintain our data. So this is a request for a little more than $7,000. Also with the governor's recommended approval. And then, Mr. Chairman, you'll see a little further down on that same page, on page 20. This is our HR consolidation effort. And so this was done in collaboration with A&I. We had one employee that was doing the HR work within the Department of Agriculture, and this reflects the moving of that employee from the Department of Ag over to A&I HR.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure, Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that HR move, just your thoughts on how well it's working is the first question. And the second, is that person still housed in the same office within your office?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that person is still housed in our office and is still physically working within the Department of Agriculture. So we've seen very little impact in terms of the amount of service or the way in which we do the work since that move several months ago.
All right, thank you. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next exception budget request can be found on page 37. And this is within our Consumer Health Services Division. We have a total of 2 exception requests within the Consumer Health Services Division. The first one you find on page 37 is our highest priority, and this is kind of a unique situation. So last year, as part of our step 3 reductions, we had identified an inspector position within one of our divisions of the Department of Ag for removal from the department. That was going to make up part of our step 3 reduction. Not everybody within the Appropriations Committee agreed that that was a prudent move for us. And so there was an effort to restore that inspector position back into the Department of Agriculture, and then to go into the 200 series of the Department of Ag to pay for that position to come back. That ultimately didn't end up happening. And so both the position and the funding from the position were eliminated from the Department of Ag during last year's session. We tried to absorb the reduction in the 200 series within both of these divisions. There's another one later on down in the exception request list. But ultimately, we just simply don't have enough money in that 200 series to maintain our obligations within a couple different divisions of the department. And so what we're asking for in this case is putting $50,000 into the 200 series of the Consumer Health Services Division so that they can maintain their accreditations and their training and get around to all of their inspection locations that they visit in a given year.
So, Director, is this coming back and I think you phrased it as restore the CHS portion of the double cut? Is there, what was the total cut that you're trying to restore?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I think originally there was the position that we had on
Which was the
books.
one inspector position, right?
So the total was $135,967.
Okay. And so we'll see, so this restores 50 that, so we'll see another 85 of this somewhere else? Okay, all right. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Representative Stitt.
just to clarify, Director, so then this $50,000 on page 37, that the description is permanently assigned vehicles, and if I'm reading that correctly. So is that basically the money's actually going to be used to cover the travel expenses for the person who's doing the meat inspections across the state? Is that the idea?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stitt, yes, that ended up coming out of permanently assigned vehicles because it was just the line item within the 200 series of that division that could absorb the reduction. But essentially, you're also correct in stating that it will go for mostly travel and support costs for those inspectors to move around the state.
Okay, thank you. Continue.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, continuing on page 38. This is another small request in the IT realm. And this has to do with credit card processing within the Consumer Health Services Division and making sure that we're carrying out the provisions of House Bill 76. And so this is the system that we're told we need. Again, with recommended approval of the governor.
Okay, thank you.
That is all I have in that division, Mr. Chairman. So the next set of exception requests start on page 43.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Co-Chair?
Thank you. Doug, I'm curious, I'm just looking at the general fund expenses for technical services, starting on page 42. Basically, it's all general fund dollars. And I look at what you describe and what they do. You inspect nurseries, greenhouses, fertilizer, seeds, greenhouse, warehouses, other nurseries, foreign commodities, apiaries, those type of things. And my question is that, does it make sense that those all charge, or do they charge fees to do that? And if so, how much they go and where do those funds go and how much do they cost?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, there are fees that are collected for almost all of those inspections, and they vary a little bit by program as to where they go and ultimately where they end up. With your permission, I would ask Julie if she has additional information about specificity for those programs within tech services.
Sure, thank you, Ms. Cook.
Mr. Chairman, so all of these establishments that we discussed have a license fee. And so we do not charge for actual inspections, but for an annual license fee. And that money does go to the general fund and not into us, with the exception of grain warehouse licenses, which we have a different budget for. But all of the licenses in here, so during the 1920, we had about $1.5 million that went to the general fund, and we're projecting to stay about the 1.5 million for the next biennium. If that's the
Yeah,
question
could
you're
you
asking.
just provide a breakdown just so we can see the numbers and if that's an annual number or biennial number for those fees? And while you're doing it, it'd be nice to know what those license fees are. So, and the number of them that are licensed, so we can kind of see the tabulation. But what you're saying in essence is they're already paying for themselves. Is that fair?
For Mr. Chairman, yes, for some portion of their services, yes, I believe they
Yeah.
are. And we do have a fee schedule that we can get to you that details that out.
Okay, and you may have done that a couple of years ago, but I just don't remember. Thanks.
We're happy to get that for you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you. All right, continue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Further down on that same page, on page 43, you'll see a request for a large capacity scale truck. What this is it's a semi essentially that carries a hydraulic crane. This is used for large capacity scales that larger amounts of mass. So it's a lot going down the road. There's a lot of weight involved, and it's got a remote cart associated with it. The truck that we have now is 17 years old, and I'm told it has almost 300,000 miles on it, but the hours are more than the 300,000 miles would indicate, just because that truck has to run the entire time to run that hydraulic system to lift those weights.
So Doug, the same question here. I mean, why would this be a general fund expense, $290,000, when it's not serving the general fund purpose? That's just my question.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, yeah, again, the inspection fees for scales go to the general fund and they're not retained within the department. But there is a scale fee.
So then going back to my question before, why don't we just make it pay for itself and not have it go to general fund and have this back and forth? I mean, to me, that just makes more sense, and it would make more sense to us who review these budgets and probably to Kevin too.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, that would be at the pleasure of you, and we could certainly support that as well. We used to maintain a portion of those inspection fees and going through.
So you have a sync fund at least you can go to. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't
So
hear.
that
you.
way you could have a sink fund at least, so that when you come to ask for 290,000, you can say, we just take it out of our sink fund.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
This is converse or upside down from the conversation that we had before, where we had all the special revenue funds and all those funds spread out where we couldn't make investments. This one actually benefits the upside down methodology where this money is in the general fund and then the agency asks for replacement equipment. So just flip flop that challenge that we discussed about the special revenue.
So, and that makes sense to me as well. But what, if that's the case, this makes, I think we need to see the data to know that in fact that it's working, because we have no idea what the funds are, how much they're making, and that, you know, it's a quid pro quo on the dollars and cents.
Mr. Chairman, we'd be happy to get that information to you. We have it compiled.
Good. Representative Larson.
Thank you, Director Miyamoto. I just want to make sure if I could go back to that section 3, that priority 1 programming, that 80, or the, no, I'm sorry, on 43, that 85, and then that 50 that we talked about together. Those were what you had done last year was removed, and you eliminated a position in Unit 303, right? It was 140. Is that the one? And then we've done it again. So we're restoring the duplicate. I just want to make sure I'm tracking correctly with that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So does LSO concur with that?
Mr. Chairman, there was a cut that was increased by the Joint Appropriations Committee and the legislature, meaning the proposal put forward last year for the budget reduction was added to by the legislature. I think we would maybe not use the term double.
It was a cut. Cut on the cut.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead, Representative Simpson.
can we stay on that? I'm a little confused on, so we're on page 43.
Yeah.
Priority number 2, program fundings. We talk about this additional cut on top of the first cut, but then we get down to the request B, we're talking about equipment repair and maintenance agreement. Am I confused there? Why are we talking about a position in the narrative and yet we're in the 200 series down below?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, this is analogous to how vehicles were assigned in the Consumer Health Services Division. We had the question about the $50,000 and why was it coming out of permanently assigned vehicles? This money came out of this line item of the 200 series because it was a line item that had enough balance in it for us to contribute that money. But
This is where you were told to make that cut, and so this is where you made the cut. They made it in 2 places. They made it $50,000 in signed vehicles and $85,000 in this, and the equipment repair and maintenance.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
It had to come from somewhere. That's where they took it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 45, this is still within our Technical Services Division. And again, this is a one-time expenditure for some additional fuel provers. We have noticed recently, as we have decreased the amount of staff that we have to send around, the gas stations are getting bigger. There's more islands, there's more pumps within those islands. And we're trying to move these diesel and gasoline provers around the state to get everywhere. And this would help us become much more efficient. We could get the increased number of pumps that need to be sampled done with less people if we had those. So this is one-time expenditure for diesel and fuel provers and some other equipment to support those.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to your scale trucks, reading your narrative, I can not quite certain on the bottom of page 44 if you have 4 scale trucks currently or 3 scale trucks currently, because you have 2 different notations there in the last 3 lines. And so just trying to clarify how I'm misunderstanding that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative, there's a total of 4 large capacity scale trucks. 3 of them are for livestock scale inspections and 1 of them are for vehicle scales.
Does the equipment have to be different for the livestock scales, trucks, scales as it does for the heavy duty truck scale?
Mr. Chairman, yes, the equipment does differ slightly. Sometimes the capacities are the same, sometimes they're not, but essentially for the livestock scales, they're often in very remote places. So we have trucks that have a little more clearance. And also what's important with those livestock scales is that you have a remote weight cart because you want to be able to stand back because the deck on a lot of those livestock scales aren't as robust as like a truck scale at a truck stop, you know. So with some of our livestock scales, you want to be well clear of that whole situation while you're driving that cart around and seeing if it's going to read correctly, because we've had a lot of weight go through decks before. So there are some subtle differences in here.
So Doug, just to follow up with my earlier line of questioning, for example, the gasoline testing trucks. Do we know that whether or not the fee that's charged in that will simply cover the costs and overages over time and transportation to that?
Mr. Chairman, we can include that in the other data that we see.
Yeah, in any of your technical or analytical services where you're going to the general fund and there's a swap, if you could address all that.
Good, Representative Larson.
Thank you. And Doug, there's kind of a fine line there too, because what you're doing on the gasoline and diesel is you're proving that their meters are accurate. It's a requirement by government to ensure that the public's getting what they pay for, correct?
That's correct.
But it should be the consumers that pay for that, not everyone in the state necessarily.
Well, and
People
Mr.
that drive
Chairman,
the trucks.
yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that that's a fair question, the consumer, but who's going to pay for it will be the business owner.
Well, they'll tag it onto their gasoline price.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman? I think
Yes, go ahead, Kevin.
I think the places where they're testing to see if you're getting 5 gallons, paying for 5 gallons, they pay a fee. And then you get a little tag that says this pump's been tested. So in fact, the consumers are paying for this.
What if I don't have a car?
Well, you don't need gasoline. So.
Yeah.
There you go.
So,
I'm still paying for it.
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
I want to know what they do with all those 5-gallon cans when they fill them up at the superstation.
Dump them back into the tanks where it came from.
You know, we've only been at this 4 days and you're already getting punchy. So let's go. Continue, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to leave that one alone.
Yeah, continue, please. I think that gets us through technical services, unless there's more questions about technical service. Okay, keep going, Doug.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 50, we have the beginning of our analytical services lab. And you can see that the first one is again in collaboration with ETS. This one's a little bit more intensive, only from the standpoint of most of the desktop equipment that runs the benchtop analytical instruments of that lab. They were all on a Windows 7 platform, and we were told that that is no longer adequate for data security. It won't talk to the equipment. We just needed an upgrade there. So this is in collaboration with ETS, and this would be to replace some of the computers and to move from Windows 7 to Windows 10 for our data analytics.
How are you doing that? They made me go off Windows 7 about 4 years ago.
Well, the question is, why wouldn't you go to Windows 11 and not 10? That's the
Mr.
latest and
Chairman,
greatest.
I don't think I'm properly equipped to answer that complicated of a question when it comes to the dynamics of
Okay.
the IT world.
Okay. We can ask Tim that later. All right. All right, continue.
Okay, the next one is also within the Analytical Services Lab. This is priority 4. This is equipment.
Ion chromatography instrument.
That's right.
Okay.
There's various pieces of equipment, obviously, in that Analytical Services Lab. And we have different levels of accreditation for each one of the analysis that we run in that lab. And so in order to maintain those accreditations, sometimes we need to replace equipment that is at the end of its life cycle, except for there is one request. The second one is a nitrogen generator. We've had that delivered for years from Gases Plus. We think we can do it cheaper this way by making our own. So that's what this request is. And then later on page 53, also within the Analytical Services Lab, we have priority 7. And this has to do with lab supplies and maintenance agreements. And one thing we've noticed through this pandemic is the cost of supplies related to lab analysis have really escalated over, I mean, just recently, the cost of disposable gloves, anything disposable, has really gone up a lot. And we've had difficulty in getting technicians to come and look at faulty equipment. So the best way to ensure that you can get somebody to come in and look at that is through maintenance agreements. We have many of them at the lab already. We just need some additional support in that vein. Did I miss one?
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Director Miyamoto, on this equipment that you're buying, and we understand that they're pricey, but what will you follow an RFP process and put that out to bid? I see that you spec the equipment. And so is that the plan though, is to go out and take RFPs on that particular type of equipment?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes.
And so follow up, if I could, Mr. Chairman, is that what we've been doing in agencies, we see these type of requests, you have kind of an idea of what that amount will be. We're kind of sending a signal out to the bidders, you know, that we've appropriated up to 142,000 for this. And what we found over the years is that we have a bid that comes in at about 139,999, you know, and so would just perhaps encourage you to look at ways to maybe disguise the amount that we have appropriated to where we're not sending the signals of what we have, trying to get a little better deal.
Mr. Chairman, Representative noted.
Okay, continue.
Please.
Okay, moving along, the next exception budget request can be found on page 105. This has to do with state fair, and again, this is an ETS request for, you know, maintaining our replacement schedule. So this one's $18,000, $18,174.
Okay.
The next one can be found on page 109, also having to deal with State Fair. And this is in collaboration with our friends at the Budget Office. This is just an effort to more accurately depict the budget and to reduce the number of B11s that are flowing through the system. So this one is just more of an accuracy question and reduction of B11. Spending authority type of question. And Mr. Chairman, the the last request that we have can be found on page 117. And again, this has to do with our highway weed and pest program. This is specific to an agreement that we have with the Department of Transportation. They forward along $500,000 a year. We send that through to an allocation committee that grants that money out to individual weed and pest districts for right-of-way maintenance of weeds. And this is a spending authority effort as well to reduce the number of B11s that flow through the system. And so that is our list, Mr. Chairman and committee, for this year. And again, appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Sure, go ahead, Mr.
I'm
Co-Chair.
curious, as a result of the COVID pandemic, did the state fair take place and did it function fully?
In fact, it was a record year, wasn't it?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, it did. We were able to host a state fair and we were one of the few, so we did get some additional consideration. We had probably the highest level of rodeo participants that we'd ever had, just basically out of lack of options for a lot of them, but it was a banner year and we'll take it.
So we were kind of hoping that this new variant might continue to grow.
Take your wins however you can get them.
All right, thank you. Anything else? Any other questions for our friends at the Department of Ag?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Kenner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, just a curiosity, since it was part of your standard budget, could you tell us a little bit about hemp production and how that's going and testing thereof?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I would be happy to do that. Generally, you know, our program has improved in terms of the number of producers that we have that didn't run into any problems with their THC concentrations this year compared to last. So last year, coming out of the gate, we had a few samples, especially those that were submitted early on, that were a little bit high in THC. We noticed improvement this year. We didn't have as much of that going on. But that being said, it's gone okay. The market is very volatile still this year. And so we don't know how profitable that business is going to be long-term. There's a lot more surplus of hemp nationwide than there is the ability to process it so far. I expect that market will stabilize at some point. And I think the COVID pandemic and supply chain issues have exacerbated volatility in the hemp market. But today we have, I was going to say, two dozen people that are permitted to grow it again this year, and the yields looked pretty good. The anecdotal information that I got looked fairly good.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, how many acres do we have under production?
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Stacia, do you happen to know the acres? I can get that information though.
Thank you.
How about meat inspection? We've had, there's been, there were some plants and I think there's at least 2 plants, I think, that are or have been completed or are under construction. And just how's that part of the inspection, that part of the inspection process going?
Mr. Chairman, so far I'm encouraged that most of the new plants that have come online within the last couple of years, there's been a lot of interest, obviously, in meat processing as of late. But USDA has been more apt to respond favorably to supplying inspectors to plants that are requesting inspection than they've been in the past. So the reason that Wyoming has a state meat inspection program to begin with is that there was a time when it was almost impossible for meat processors in Wyoming to get federal inspection. They simply wouldn't send an inspector out due to the quantity of meat that we were processing, decades ago. And so states have a choice then about how to address that issue. And the way that we went about it was to get our own program up and going and supply that inspection to at least allow them the ability to sell meat. Federal inspection is better in that if you have a federal inspector, you can sell your product across state lines. Whereas if you have a state inspector, you're confined to the boundaries of the state of Wyoming. So, it's a process that we were providing the highest level of service that we could at the time, still meet a need. It really wasn't an option for us to get federal inspectors, but today it seems to be working. And so, for those plants that are just recently opened up, I haven't heard of a case where USDA has said, we're not going to send an inspector. So far, they've been helpful in granting that request for inspection. So I think it's going well.
Are they, is that inspector, those inspectors, they come into Billings or where they, do you know where they're coming from?
Mr. Chairman, typically what they'll do is they'll issue a job announcement for that area. That they're going to be looking for an inspector to permanently assign to either one plant or a collection of plants in that one area. And they'll report through Billings typically. So their chain of command does go up through those regional offices throughout the country, but that's typically how they go about that.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Go ahead, Representative Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Miyamoto, when I was on the Agriculture Committee a few years ago, the legislature in conjunction with your agency made quite a few shifts with the state fair to try to make it become more self-sufficient. Now we've got a couple of years under our belt. What's your observation there? Is the processes we put in place helping at all?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think we have been able to have a couple of successful fairs in the last couple of years. Now, the success of those fairs and whether they're attributable to a new administration shift at the fair, I think has yet to bear out, only in that we've had some very unique situations over the past 2 years. So since the new committee was established, that's when it coincided with the start of this pandemic. And so our data on state fair is clouded behind these covariates of influences that's hard for us to dissect. So I think it'll take a little more analysis, but we are getting that work done.
Any other questions? Okay, I guess that's it. Thanks so much. Appreciate
Thank
your
you,
time
Mr.
today.
Chairman. Appreciate it.
So you want to call Corin? Maybe she can come wrap it up first.
That's it. That's it. We ran the gamut today.
Mr. Chairman, you have on tomorrow's agenda is Public Service Commission, which shouldn't take long. State capital construction, that one might take some time. There's a total of approximately $305 million of exception requests of state funds, SIPA or general funds, and then closing out the day with the Department of Family Services. Despite that, I do think it's quite likely that you will adjourn rather early with those agencies.
So, Kevin, and we've got the capital construction coming tomorrow, but yet we've got, in fact, aren't they meeting right now? Isn't the strike task force meeting right now, which isn't all capital construction, but yet there are a series of I think there are some capital construction projects in there. As we talk about, as we begin the discussion about capital construction, we're just gonna, I guess we'll go through the book and then the governor will present letters later on, or how do you see it being handled from your end?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the intent will be that the governor will provide you a letter that's encompassing all of the ARPA, both the calculated revenue assistance and the direct ARPA. And then we will naturally want to be cognizant of any intel that we have on a national basis for CAPCON so that we can leverage those, obviously. And then right now we do have a template that we are using in the strike force that provides us the chart field. The chart field is the object, and it's in sync with the Treasury's categories that they have now. And when we have the final approvals, then what we will do is we'll take those and load those into IBARs, both for the courts and for the executive branch, so that we can ultimately interface when we go into July 1st, the whole budget that we're talking about now, and also the approved appropriated associated ARPA dollars as well. But we do want to have in the final answer is a one overall encompassing our IBARs instance to cover both the budget work that we're doing and the ARPA work.
So do you see those, ultimately, do we see all those being folded in, or at least not all, but at least the construction out of ARPA? Is that going to be folded into the CAPCON bill eventually? Is that how we see this proceeding?
Mr. Chairman, yes, what we need to do is we need to be thinking in terms of, prior to you appropriating a state dollar, is it a greater benefit to the citizens of Wyoming to appropriate a direct ARPA dollar if we have it, or when we get the infrastructure bill from that particularly, or how we handle the calculated amount for revenue assistance? And also remember, we've had a couple of conversations about positioning ourselves to match perhaps large national situations for the federal CAPCON bill, infrastructure bill, excuse me. Like perhaps they're going to put in a gas hub or something to those effects, so that maybe they'll call for a matching requirement. And obviously the first place that we'd go for the matching would be the ARPA revenue assistance pot, and then after that would be the LISRA. And you heard the governor talk about that when he delivered his budget.
And then the other question I'd have is kind of the same idea, but it's in my mind's a little bit more convoluted, and that is water projects. So we'll have a couple of omnibus water bills that come out, and then out of the strike force team is going to be recommendations with respect to some water projects. I mean, just curious about how do we see that where we work? Because obviously I don't think the Select Water Committee and Ag Committee Joint Ag Committee are not going to be meeting before session.
That's correct. And there's representation on those on the strike force for us to be thinking about how that relates to water. And water is a high priority.
And so ultimately if we get the same kind of recommendations, we look at the recommendations, I guess what will happen is we'll just need to amend those as they come, as those bills come through. Is that our plan, Dawn? Have you got any thoughts about that?
Mr. Chairman, I believe there are several committees who already have sponsored bills or have had bills drafted awaiting a vote for the use of ARPA funds. For example, I believe the Select Water Committee does have a ARPA projects fund in the neighborhood of 145 million.
Actually, 95 million, Mr. Chairman.
Your broadband task force also has a piece of legislation in the neighborhood, well, since I was off by 50, over $100 million. So there will be likely bills that are using the ARP funds, and that is actually on your SharePoint, the list of all committee bills that we know of to date with ARP funds. Some of them may frankly not qualify under the federal requirements. I believe there is a wild horse piece of legislation in the department or the Joint Committee on Agriculture. I think what they are technically seeking is general funds from the conserved general fund pot for that purpose.
So again, you get, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
Oh, yeah, I was just thinking that, last year, basically, we had all of the ARPA or the COVID bills assigned to JAC, and in part, we just removed the dollar amounts. So that then the legislature kind of started over then with how much was available, and I'm hoping that takes place again, but we don't know if that's going to be the case or not. But the other component is that with, for example, with ARPA, if it's the tickets to 1.0 some billion dollars, of which you can have over 3 to 4 years to spend and to appropriate, then there's going to be a strong desire to do nothing and to wait for another year or two so that we only expend so much of the dollars. I think we have a general proposition from the chief executive of saving around 450 million. So that only leaves a balance of, whenever 5.5 to 600. If you go 1.5 or 1.66 number you want to go to. But what our concerns are is that the strike force and this process may create some expectations that cannot be met. And similarly, if you then start adding in the legislative bills, this committee did 55 million for the fireman A. And then if you start stacking all those up, we're already at over 400 million roughly. And so it's just, I think we've got to walk slowly and with focused steps on how we proceed with this, so that otherwise we're going to, we'll be in a quandary like funding education, and we won't be able to come to a center ground for who wants what and how we're going to get there.
So, Mr. Chairman, we worked diligently so that we would have a contract in place, which we do now. And we're going to have our first meeting with Clifton Larson Allen Thursday. And we'll be having an introductory conversation, and certainly we'll be engaging them with the strike force. And also we want dashboards that will manage all these things, the bills that we're going to be seeing, the questions about the infrastructure, how does that apply, looking at our budgets for CapCon and comparing that to the infrastructure bill or the ARP bill. So in our contract, it's pretty heavy on dashboard. And what I mean by that is to oversimplify the conversation so that we can have it not just for the Joint Appropriations Committee and the body legislature, but the citizens of Wyoming as well. So that was one of the primary focuses that we had with the contract, and we're spending 3.1 million on that for the life of the contract. In terms of that, you basically could fund the state budget department for a couple of bienniums on that same dollar. So we expect solid results. And we also expect to have input from the legislature, from the Joint Appropriations Committee, from LSO on how best to provide that information. So that's where I would like to get the thought process started. What are your needs so that we can get them on our radar and address them so where this becomes simpler rather than more difficult?
Right. You come down to just as a practical matter. If we're, just like we had last time, we're going to have, you're going to have 5, 6 bills come inside house that come in with these, seeking these appropriations. And somehow, some way, we've got to balance all those. If that bill comes to appropriation and it goes through with that appropriation amount, and it passes, then we're obligated. But so it's just as a practical matter, we've got, we'll have to figure this out because, February 12th is not very far away, and it's obviously has to be fluid because the federal government's still doing their stuff. We're trying to get up to speed, but we have to find a practical way to balance these and orient these things. And I don't know how we do that other than kind of like we did last time. You're gonna have to come out and it's gonna have to be in the budget bill or the capital construction bill or some kind of combination where we come back and allocate or actually appropriate to those various projects that show up in those individual bills. I don't know how else you're gonna do it. Otherwise, it's gonna be like all of a sudden we're gonna end up with 15 appropriation bills instead of 4. Yes, Senator Drew.
Just a comment, and I don't know, but one of the things I'd be interested in is, we went through, just last year, we went through the CARES Act and we appropriated a hell of a lot of money in a short period of time. Has anyone talked about what worked, what didn't work, what was, what were the things we did right? What were the things we wish we could have done better? And maybe try to talk about that, at least with, whether it be just even the strike force or whoever, but just, or even ourselves, to say, how do we, is there some lessons learned there that we can take going forward? I know we've talked about it informally, about things that we'd like to see about economic development and priority lists and things like that,
I think the differences between this and that, between this and CARES Act is the CARES Act, we basically made 4 big pots of money and said, all right, Governor, go forth and do good work. Don't screw it up. But we could do that again. We can delegate that power, but I don't think I don't think that's what you're going to find the majority of the legislature is interested in.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting see what he did with that good work and say, maybe we can replicate stuff that worked and maybe not do things that maybe didn't work as well, or things that we thought weren't as on the mark. I don't know.
So, Mr. Chairman, we know, we have a pretty good idea of where all those dollars went. And Don sent us weekly or monthly updates on it, where every penny went and how it happened. And we were monitoring it at the time as it transpired. But I would agree that with the co-chair that this is a different kind of money, a different color of money. So it's going to it will be done differently. And my concern is that I can very easily envision that every penny of it could be appropriated or saved in this next budget session by the legislature without regard to what the governor's doing. And something that just differently than what the strike team is going to come up with, the task force. And knowing that, that was my first comment to the strike team as I sat on most of those meetings. I said, we just got to be careful in this, or we're going to create a lot of ill will unnecessarily on how we're going to proceed. And so I just want to continue to walk down that cautious step that we have communications. But we don't know, we know water, what's 95 million, and boom, boom, boom. Pretty soon that 500 million is going to be gone. And then if we save 500 million, then we've got other general fund dollars. But I think we're going to be reticent to spend that on special projects. So it'll be an interesting process. And it's worth, to me, bringing it up so that we slow down the.
Yeah, I'm not asking for answers today. It's just we got to be thinking about these things because we're going to be in the thick of it here in 2 months. So. Yeah, Representative Simpson. But first, Representative Walters, did you have some other thoughts that you wanted to share with us? You forgot what they were? Okay, Representative Simpson.
I think, Mr. Co-Chairman's, you're exactly on. There's got to be somehow where we can come together with governor's group and everyone that wants to put forth any kind of a special use of this money. We've got to somehow have a clearinghouse. Just for your information, the strike team worked very closely with the Select Water Committee. We were literally working as a team to come up with our program, and our program is for water and wastewater. And it's a program administered by the Water Development Commission, and it's $95 million, and people apply, come together. 3 agencies that help develop the rules. And so there's a very specific strategy on that particular one. But I don't know if the strike team has been out. I understand there's some bills out for education to fund long-term scholarships and things like that are probably floating out there that many of us are not even aware of.
Yeah, so I think that's the point. With every $1 billion you have, there's going to be 4 to 5 billion places for it to go. So, Kevin, did you have a thought?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We're building a budget as if there is no ARPA, as there is no CARES. Was our first priority. And I know that this is gut wrenching, the amount of effort that we're going to have to continue to apply to this. And that's why we have a consultant and we want to use that, but we don't want to do it in a vacuum. We want advice, we want coaching, we want LSO's thoughts. Now's the time to start to develop that and then lay it out, see if it works. If it doesn't work, then tweak it to the extent that everybody's getting the information they need to bring their added value to decision making. That's what we want to try to accomplish.
And I think the co-chair's point, just for everybody, again, I'm going to repeat it to keep in mind is you don't have to spend all the money in this session, right? I mean, if you commit all the money this session, the emergencies that we have that we didn't even anticipate a year from now go unfunded. So anyway, just there's a bunch of moving parts. So just everybody keep that in the back of your mind as you start to develop and this works. So this is going to be a really fluid. This is going to be a really interesting budget session. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Yes, Don.
Mr. Chairman, just 2 minutes if I might, only
Sure.
because I've received, I think, 5 questions over the last break about the explanation of the carryover funds. So you've seen this in a number of different agencies. Legally, the place to look for that is section 303 of the budget bill, and that lists all of the agency authorizations to carry over funds appropriated from either the prior biennium or several prior biennia before that. Typically, this authorization is used for one-time funding, IT projects like the EQ's effort to go paperless, startup funds like the HEMP program was funded with a piece of legislation, and then that startup money was allowed to carry over into the next biennium. Also, when funds become tight, policymakers often elect to use carryover funds, whether that be the governor or you and your colleagues. And the reason for that is a policy choice. It doesn't show up on the profile because it's not a new general fund appropriation. It allows the use of previously appropriated funds. From an accounting standpoint, 1 year or one biennium carry forward is not that bad, and your current section 303 is in fairly good order. But there are some examples where you have multiple biennia. And the public defender is an example of that. And I think to Chairman Nicholas's inquiry, what amounts are available from which biennia is important. We always encourage to use the oldest money first and proceed that way. But there are some examples of agencies that have carried over funds for a decade or more that are still out there, still active appropriations. And that becomes a challenge in the accounting because too many of your questions, those do not appear in the budget request documents, and they're difficult, if not impossible, to find in the state's accounting information. Many of these are side calculations done at the agency level to Chairman Nicholas's inquiry. So hopefully that provides just a little background on where you find these, the legal authority, and then the accounting of these dollars.
So Don, can Kevin or you or Don or LSO come up with a spreadsheet to show us what's out there? And how much? What agency? I mean, how many are there? Or is there?
Mr. Chairman, there's about 20 that are in the budget. And those are relatively easily identified what they are. What we cannot do is identify how much money it is. And in the capital case, it becomes fairly easy because that agency knows they don't intend to spend anything over the next 6 or 7 months. In many of the other cases, like the Department of Health, for example, it's very difficult to ask them, what will the balance of your account be in 7 months? They can estimate that. Certainly, we can't because it requires intimate knowledge of their operations in order to come up with an estimate of how much. So we can identify where the funds are, what agency and what purpose, but we don't have an ability to reasonably indicate how much will be available.
It seems to me, I remember John Schiffer, when John Schiffer was head of management audit, that was their exercise one year, and they came back with 30 million or 20 million, 30 million, something like that, of those funds that we collected and ended up closing out in different accounts over time. But Kevin, you were going to say something.
Mr. Chairman, you know, we could go through the exercise of trying to figure out what it is, or we could ask Section 300 to say, maintain a report on this when we cross the biennium. So everything has to be approved, and it does, carried forward, and then we would have it, and then we wouldn't have to go digging around. We could just make sure that, force the accounting of it on the cross of this upcoming biennium. That seems a little bit easier.
Well, so my follow-up with that is that, you know, we can make that directive in the budget, or we can make it statutory. All agencies that have carryover dollars will account for it at the end of each biennium, how much it is, where it came from. And I mean, it seems to me that might be ways that we can drive the bus a little better than we're driving it now.
That, or do you put it in the Chapter 17 report, or what would be the best place to do that?
Mr. Chairman, actually, this committee did this requirement and placed it on the state auditor. And that position does report to JAC the fall of every even numbered year. So you get a report of all of the carryovers, not only the ones in Section 303, but for example, there's statute that says IT projects do not revert. Capital construction projects do not revert. So they are allowed, agencies are allowed to carry over those funds, and they are reported to you in roughly October of even numbered years. So that's a great resource. Where it is perhaps insufficient is it only covers general funds. So it does not cover AML funds, special revenue, other types of funds.
Why not?
Because
What you don't know will hurt you. Okay.
So
Thank you.
Kevin, do you see a need for us to do anything, or what would you recommend?
Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to put it in a state budget department effort. You know, for example, the B11 work that we've done this year to get everybody to appropriate repeated B11s, we simply just said that was going to be a strategic effort on our part. You know, we can make it a strategic effort on our part, and we do require that the IT stuff gets the approval of the OCIO when they carry forward. I mean, we can take a run at it, but I do believe that the right point in time is to do it when we cross the biennium. And that would also allow us to use the benefit of the Senate File 70, I think was what Don's referring to. We could be able to dovetail that with that effort that's already being done in the state auditor's office. Give us a chance. We'll tell you how we did, and we'll let you know what we learned in the process. And then we can true it up as we proceed. I don't expect to have resistance on it, honestly. Stats help us when you feel that you're going to be resisted, but I don't understand why there'd be any resistance to this.
Okay. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Kinski.
a question for Don. He indicated that the list of all the bills that have significant appropriations in them is in SharePoint. I'm looking at SharePoint. Don, can you tell me where that is?
Mr. Chairman, that is on your left-hand side of SharePoint under the library. There is a folder for LSO documents.
Okay.
In session 2022. I believe it's the only document in that folder.
And those are bills that are already approved by a committee or?
Mr. Chairman, approved or drafted. I think there are a couple that were in process. In fact, I think I could be wrong, Representative Simpson, but I believe
That's a big number.
your legislation might be
yeah.
by email ballot. I'm not positive that piece has been fully drafted. So there are a couple that are in progress, and I don't know if that's one of them.
So we know there's a few more out there.
Oh, crap. No, my SharePoint doesn't work.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a fairly safe bet, as well as looking in there. I think there are some examples where the appropriation is pretty evident to be a placeholder and not, yeah.
So anything else we need to do for tomorrow, Don, or any comments on then? I did get an email from what's the Business Council, wondering if they, because we're going faster than normal, he's wondering if that's going to happen again in that week in January. And if we want to add the possibility of more people presenting next week, if we have, if time allows, and so we might at least allow that inquiry to go out. So that if in fact we are ahead of schedule.
Mr. Chairman, we will absolutely do that. We had initially worked to move agencies at the end and shift them into December. That was an error in judgment on my part. We should have picked agencies at the beginning of January. And that's what we have shifted to now with the Department of Agriculture, for example. We don't want to leave holes in January. So at your direction, we can contemplate starting on, say, Wednesday of January, if you so desire, rather than Monday. I believe it's January 10th. You could start on Wednesday, January 12th, if we could move, 2 days of agencies from January into December. That might be an option for you.
So why do you say it was an error? Just because we're going faster, or because?
Right. So now, unfortunately, we have a hole in the January agenda in the middle, which is not ideal. So I would prefer to have the whole, maybe starting a little later.
And it wouldn't be a bad idea in January to give us an extra day or two simply to address the ARPA dollar issues, and maybe even have presentations on different requests. And by doing so, we can kind of direct the funnel so that from leadership and management, in fact, it should come to us because we're already doing the homework.
Mr. Chairman, I think the governor has also requested to return in the middle of January, in addition to his appearance on December 16th. And without a doubt, you will have plenty of time, given the pace at which you have proceeded this first week.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, what do you think of that idea of letting us play a little bit longer in the first 2 weeks of January? And moving them up to fill out the week next week.
We can talk about that. Okay.
Give us maybe you could just send us an email, meaning the co-chairs, of what that would look like. Just kind of, so we can kind of soundboard it out and see it.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we set it for today then? All right, thanks for your time. We'll see you in